In this week's parasha, we have the halachas of tzaras. And I'd like to talk about one form of tzaras, which is nigei batim, the tzaras of houses, which is mentioned in the second of the two parashas, Tazria-Metzora. The Torah tells us that when we come to Eretz Yisrael, "V'nosati negat tzaras b'veis eretz achuzaskam." I will place a negat tzaras in your houses. And the person comes to the kohen and tells him, "Ki nega nir li baboyis," appears like a nega. So the kohen gives a command. Everything is removed from the house, and the kohen comes to examine the nega. So the Torah says that immediately the kohen is mazgir the house for a week. There are no definite signs of tzaras when it comes to batim. Every house requires a week of hezger. And then the kohen comes a week later. If the nega has expanded, so then the stones on which the nega are found are removed, and there's a second week of hezger. If at the end of the second week of hezger the nega returns, then the entire house is destroyed. Chazal darshan the psukim and develop the halachas, and they say as follows, that there are situations where there can be a third week of hezger. There's 1 other 2 weeks. If after the first week the nega spreads, so then chaylites the kites of betach, the stones are removed, and then there's a second week of hezger. If the nega returns, the house is destroyed. But let's say, for example, at the end of the first week, the nega did not expand, it remained the same. So then there's a second week of hezger. At the end of the second week of hezger, it makes no difference whether the nega expanded or whether the nega stayed the same. Again, you'd be chaylet kites of betach, you'd remove the stones and give it a third week of hezger. And then, if the nega returns, you destroy the house. So the Torah talks about a case where the status of the nega is clarified after 2 weeks because it expanded after the first, but there could be cases where it takes 3 weeks to clarify the status of the house. If the nega stayed the same after the first week, then there's an additional week of hezger, and only then you're chaylet kites of betach, only then do you remove the stones and give it a third week. And the Mishnah in Erechin speaks out that this is the most severe form of tzaras in this one sense. The nigei batim is the only type of tzaras that can take 3 weeks to clarify. Normally, negoyim require a maximum of 2 weeks. In many instances, 1 week is enough. But nigei batim have the potential for 3 weeks. And the Gemara brings on this the pasuk mishpatecha tahim rabba, that the Kadosh Baruch Hu's judgments are very, very deep, very serious. That's a reference to the parsha of nigei batim, where there can be 3 weeks that you're left hanging. And the mashmalos of the Gemara is that the real midas hadin, the real judgment, is the not knowing. That's worse than knowing. So if there are 3 weeks of indecision where the person doesn't know where he stands, that's mishpatachat tahim rabba, and that applies to nigei batim. What is the idea behind nigei batim? Obviously, as the Ramban says, this is not a natural phenomenon. Houses don't contract illnesses. So here we have Memory Chazal, which seem to contradict one another. Rashi quotes them all. Al pi the Gemara in Erechin, nigei batim are a punishment for the chet of tzorosayim. If a person is stingy, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes him by sending him a nega, which may ultimately lead to the destruction of the house. Where is there a remes, the idea of tzorosayim? Because the pasuk says, "Ubo asher lo habayis," the person to whom the house belongs should come. What does it mean, asher lo habayis? Misha miyached beiso lo. This refers to a person who treats his house as if it is exclusively his. He doesn't share with anybody else. And the Rashi quotes that this is the significance of the kohen giving the command to clear out the house, that the stingy person. People come to borrow things. What's his excuse? Whatever people need, he doesn't have. And now HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows everything that he has. The entire contents of the house are removed and put on the front lawn, so everyone sees. He had the shovel, he had the svarim, whatever people wanted to borrow, he really did have. So that really exposes him to all. So that's one way of looking at it, that it's an einash for the chet of Tazria-Metzora. Another pshat Rashi brings, this is based on the Medrash Rabbah, that this is a good thing. Because the Canaanim, when they built their houses, used to bury treasures in the walls. And the Jew who moved into an ancient Canaanite house would never know. So the Baruch Hu sends the nega. This necessitates sometimes removing the stones, sometimes even tearing down the entire house, and the treasures are revealed, and the person becomes wealthy. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu have to do it in such a way is a good question. But probably if the person becomes a millionaire, he's not going to complain. So it's a Besura Taiva, it's good news that HaKadosh Baruch Hu enriches Klal Yisrael in this very unusual way. So these are various pshatim. At first glance, it's hard to reconcile the two pshatim. If it's an einish for the chet of Tazria-Metzora, it's hard to hear that it should be the means by which the person becomes a multimillionaire. So I guess we would assume sometimes it's the one, sometimes it's the other. And this is, of course, all well-known. Rashi quotes the two pshatim. But there's a third pshat, a third remez, through the idea of Nigei Batim, which the Medrash Rabbah quotes. The Medrash Rabbah says as follows: Beveis eretz achuzascha, Hashem will send a nega to the house of your holding, ze Beis HaMikdash. But this is a remez to the Beis HaMikdash. And when it says that Hashem will send a nega, this is a reference to the pasuk in Yechezkel, where Hashem says, "Hineni machal es migdashi goin uschem." I will violate my holy place, the height of your strength. This is a reference to HaKadosh Baruch Hu bringing Churban. So the nega tzaras that Hashem places with Eitzeres of Uzaschem is a reference to the Churban. Ubo asher lo abayis, and he to whom the house belongs will come. Zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he'll tell the Kayin, Zeh Yirmiyah. That refers to the Navi Yirmiyah. The Navi Yirmiyah was a Kayin. The pasuk says he was ben the Kayhanim asher ba'anasais. He was actually a Kayin. And he tells the Navi, Kinega nearly labayis. It appears there's something like a nega in the house. What is that a reference to? This is a reference to the Avodah Zara, which was the cause of the Churban. Then she says two pshat. One pshat is Zet Tunaitis Avodah Zara. The Yishonim is that Tzal Moshel Menashe. This was the idol that Menashe erected in the Beis HaMikdash itself. The Tziva HaKayin, and the Kayin, meaning the Navi Yirmiyah, gave the order Upino es Habayis, and that's a reference to the pasuk Vayikra es Eitzrois Beis Hashem, that Nebuzaradan, who was Nebuchadnezzar's general, cleared out the storehouses of the Beis HaMikdash. He took all the gold and silver as spoils to Bavel. That's the Tziva HaKayin Upino es Habayis, that the Navi Yirmiyah, the Kayin, gave the word, and the house was cleared. And then it says that the house is ultimately destroyed. But it says, "V'lokchu avon acheres," that they take other stones to replace the stones that were removed. And this is a reference to the Nevuah in Yeshaya about the Binyan Bayesheni, Lachein Kayam Hashem Elokim, Hineni Yisad B'Tzion, Oven, I will lay the foundation, a stone, Evan Boichan, Pinas Yikras, Musad, a well-tested stone, a precious stone, a well-established stone. That'll be the foundation for the Bayis Sheni. So the Avonim Acherim, which replaced the first Avonim, is a reference to the Binyan Bayis Sheni. The various Mefarshim and Midrashim now that we know from the Medrash that the Psukim are a remez to the Beis HaMikdash, try to learn the Psukim and show the exact parallels between the Psukim and the Parsha of Nigei Batim and the history of the Beis HaMikdash. So, for example, the Yefei Tayar, in his longer version, Yefei Tayar Ha'aruch, says like this. There's a Yerushalmi which says in the first parak of Yuma that there was a big difference in the Churban Bayis Rishon and the Churban Bayis Sheni. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash, he only destroyed the ceiling. The walls were left intact. When the Bayis Sheni was destroyed, that was Aru Ada Yesodaba, that the walls were torn down to the very foundation. So, says the Yefei Tayar like this. If you go back to the parsha of the Nigei Batim, what does it say? It says that the Kayan comes and he examines the house, and there's 1 week of Hezger. After the week he comes back, if the Nega expanded, so the stones are removed. The house isn't destroyed, but those stones are removed. Then, and replaced. If the Nega comes back, then the entire house is destroyed. So says the Yefei Tayar that the removal of the stones, that's a remez to the Churban Bayis Rishon. When the Nega came back and the entire house was destroyed, that's a remez to the Churban Bayis Sheni. How do you account for the difference? It's partial. Because we know that the Churban Bayis Sheni, as we said, in Yerushalmi, was worse than the Churban Bayis Rishon. The Churban Bayis Rishon was only a destruction of the ceiling. This was the destruction of the entire structure. So therefore, the removal of the stones corresponds to the Churban Bayis Rishon. The total destruction of the house corresponds to the Churban Bayis Sheni. So there's a remez to the destruction of both B'tei Mikdash here. So the Yefei Tayar asks himself, so why isn't there a remez to the binyan of the Bayis Shlishi? So he says, based on the famous Rashi Masechus Rosh Hashanah, the Aflam, and other places, that the Bayis Shlishi will not be a binyan b'dei Adam. It won't be built by man. It'll come min hashamayim. So here we're only talking about what human beings do. So when the stones are removed, which symbolizes the Churban Bayis Rishon, there is a reference to the replacement with other stones, which is the binyan Bayis Sheni. But when it talks about the destruction of the Bayis Sheni, the Notat of the Bayis, the entire destruction of the house, there's no reference to the building of the Bayis Shlishi, because that would be B'dei Shemayim. That's not going to be done by Basar B'dam. So, in other words, there's an attempt to show how the Psukim exactly match the Churban Beis HaMikdash. The Chassam Sofer has a different cheshbon. The Chassam Sofer says the reason there's no remez to the binyan Bayis Shlishi is because on that Chazal say that liba lepuma lo galva, that the cheshbon of binyan Bayis Shlishi, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu keeps in his heart, he never revealed it to his mouth. He never told it to a Navi. Liba lepuma lo galia. It's a secret. And therefore, even in the Torah, there's no remez to binyan Bayis Shlishi. So I was thinking perhaps what the Chassam Sofer meant was like this, that he also understood that the removal of the stones is a remez to the Churban Bayis Rishon, and the destruction of the house is a remez to the Churban Bayis Sheni. But the difference is not for the reason that the Yefei Tayar said. The reason is because the Churban Bayis Rishon was not as bad as the Churban Bayis Sheni in that it was only temporary. It only remained in a state of destruction for 70 years. The Churban Bayis Sheni is a much worse destruction because it seems that it's already been for 2,000 years. So in Mela, therefore, that's why the binyan Bayis Shlishi isn't mentioned. It's because the Churban Bayis Sheni has that permanence to the extent that we can't even imagine when it will be rebuilt. Liba lepuma lo galia, and therefore there's no reference to the binyan Bayis Shlishi. Al kaponim. However we learn, there's a remez here to the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Now it's very interesting. The Sfarim bring from the Rakeach, very interesting thing. We mentioned the Mishnah in Erechim, that the Mishnah in Erechim says that by Nigei Batim, you have the potential of 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Hezger. So the Rakeach says, based on this Medrash, that these 3 weeks of Hezger correspond to the 3 weeks between Yeshiva Sabbat Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. Because since the whole parsha of Nigei Batim is a remez to the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So the 3 weeks of Nigei Batim are remez to the 3 weeks Tazria-Metzora and Yeshiva Sabbath and Tisha B'Av. We have to understand that even when we have a remez, we have a parsha in the Torah which hints, alludes to something else, there has to be some connection, some deep connection between the parsha of Nigei Batim and the parsha of the Churban Beis Hamikdash. At first glance, other than the fact that in both instances we're talking about buildings being destroyed, it's hard to understand what is the connection between the one and the other. So I'd like to explain, perhaps, Al Pi Zohar HaKadosh in this week's parsha. It's a fantastic Zohar. The Zohar gives us another insight into the idea of Nigei Batim. And it says as follows. The Zohar brings the pasuk, "V'nosati neged tzaras v'seretz uzaschem." Hashem says, "I will give the neged tzaras." And the Zohar brings the explanation of the Medrash. V'chi agar tafu. It's a good reward, Nigei Batim. The yishtakach b'inon de zakon l'meil ba'ara. Right? Is it a good reward that the people that come into Eretz will have to destroy their houses? We already explained. It's in order to find the treasures that are buried in their house. So the Zohar brings the Medrash. But the Zohar asks a question. That l'chora, it says in the pasuk like this. It says that when the Kayin removes the stones, after the nega spreads, he removes the stones, it says he brings other stones to replace the first stones. So asks the Zohar, if the whole purpose is only to discover the treasures, why does he have to replace the stones with different stones? Why doesn't he just put the same stones back? Very simple question. Practical question. That if the whole purpose of tearing the stones out is to find the treasure that's behind the stones, so why is there a halacha that you have to replace the stones with different stones? Just put the same stones back. If the purpose of this was only to find the treasures, return the stones to the same place. And turn the plaster also to its place. But the pasuk says, you remove the stones, and it says, offer acher yikach, you bring other offer. In other words, you don't put back the same stone, so why not? It's a very, very good question. So the Zohar has a long hakdama to answer this question. It says like this. It says that when the Mishkan was built, and the women, for example, they spun the goat's hair to make the yeriyos. It says, "B'sharta davu avdin avidata." When they did the avodah, they did the work. Havu amri, they would say, and everything they did, dal migdasha, this is for the migdash. Dal mashkana, this is for the mishkan. Dal peruchta, this is for the paraychas. And not only the women, everybody did it. Everything everybody did. They said verbally, this is for the Aron, this is for the Shulchan, this is for the Krashim, etc. Why? Begin the Yishrei Kedusha al Yadayu. In order that the Kedusha should rest on the thing through their efforts. In other words, in order that the thing should be truly sanctified, it's necessary to verbalize, to say, I am doing this for the sake of the Mishkan, for the sake of the Migdash, for the sake of the Parechas, or for the sake of whatever it is. You have to verbalize what you say. Says the Zohar, Kigav Nada, similarly, Man da'avid avidat al Avodah Zarah. People that worship Avodah Zarah, or the Sitra Achra, Glo Kadisha, or they worship the Sitra Achra, the side of impurity, they did the same thing. If they were making something for Baal, for Asherah, for the Satan, whatever it was, they would say, this is for Baal, this is for Asherah, this is for the Satan. Why? Why did they do that? In order that the Ruach Mesava Sharia Eloi, in order that the Ruach HaTumah should rest upon it. So it says that when the Canaanim built their houses, they built their houses to be temples to the Avodah Zarah, just like a Yiddish house, right, is a temple to the Ribbon Shalom. The Zohar brings later on, right? An interesting thing that when a Jew builds a house, listen to what it says. Valda man de bani binyan. When a person builds a building, kashari lemivne. When he begins to build, boy lad kara b'kumei. He should say with his mouth, the hal lepulchana the kutshabrichu rubani. That he is building this to serve the Ribbon Shalom. And that's the pasuk which says, "Upakarata novecha," and the Zohar teaches that to mean that you will designate your house below sechta, and you won't sin, because if you dedicate your house, designate your house from Avodas Hashem, then there will be a special siyata d'shmaya that the house should be a house that's free from sin. But the Knanim, they designated their house for Avodah Zarah. And therefore, when Klal Yisrael came into Eretz Yisrael, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to purify them, ulekatsh loy nara, and to sanctify the land, ulafna asar l'shchinta, and to clear a place for the Shechina to rest, therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends the Neged Tzaras, in order that she remove the wood and the stones that were made to accommodate the Ruach HaTumah. It's an amazing thing that the Zohar HaKadosh says. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants Eretz Yisrael to be pure. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't say that every house had to be destroyed. In fact, there's even a mandamar in the Gemara that says Nigei Batim actually never happened. But in theory, there could be some places where it would be impossible to be machnes that house l'kedusha. Let me see what I mean. And we talked about this in the past, that there's a halacha, for example, of tfilas kelim. Right? If a person buys kelim from a non-Jew, so a person has to be toivel the kelim before you use them. So Taisus explains in Avodah Zarah that this really is similar to the halacha of gerus. Just like a person who is nichnas, he enters into the fold, he becomes a member of Klal Yisrael, he has to be toivel because he is entering into the Kedushas Yisrael. So kelim have the same halacha. Right? A kelim which is yotze from the Rosh and is nichnas, it enters into the Rosh Yisrael, it has to have tefillah in order to be nichnas into the Kedushas Yisrael, which teaches us that our possessions really are sanctified. Because when you take something from a non-Jew and you purchase that thing, it isn't just that, okay, once it was his, now it's mine. You're bringing that thing into Kedusha, and as part of the sanctification, it requires tefillah in a mikveh. So when Klal Yisrael entered Eretz Yisrael, they were bringing all the houses, all the buildings, all the conquered material, they were bringing it to Kedusha. Just mention as an aside, the Sfas Emes says that the treasures, remember we're talking about the treasures? Chazal say that they came in and there were buried treasures. So Sfas Emes says that you can interpret that literally, money, chests of gold coins, but you can also interpret that figuratively. The treasures were the nitzaitzos of Kedusha, the sparks of Kedusha, that now could be brought forth when the Jews took possession of these things. Because everything we know, everything has aspects of Kedusha. There are sparks of Kedusha in everything. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made must have some spark of holiness in it. But as long as it was in the Rishus of the Ovdei Kechavim, the Kedusha was very much suppressed, very much concealed and hidden. When Klal Yisrael takes possession, they bring forth the Mitzvahs HaKedusha. Those are the treasures. Those are the matmoniyos. It wasn't the question of money and riches and financial advantage. Taking these things which were previously in the Rishus Ovdei Kechavim and bringing them into Kedusha, that's the treasure. That's the wealth that is now being acquired. But there are certain things that can't be nechnos to Kedusha. There are certain things on which the shame of Avodah Zarah, the Ruach Mesaba, the Ruach HaTumah, was so intense that they couldn't be elevated. And therefore, those things have to be destroyed. So the Baruch sends a signal, he sends the nega. The nega tells us this, here the stones have to be removed, here the whole house has to be destroyed. But the tachlis is in order to be able to bring everything in the Kedusha. So what can be brought into Kedusha is brought into Kedusha. Which can't be brought in Kedusha is singled out for destruction. But that facilitates that everything else can be brought into Kedusha, and thus in Eretz Yisrael we can create a makom for Ashras Hashchina. Meaning, if there would be these places and these stones which had the Ruach HaTumah, that would preclude the possibility of Ashras Hashchina in the entire Eretz Yisrael. Now there may be many places that were pure, but when it comes to Ashras Hashchina, 80% isn't good enough, and 85% isn't good enough, and 90% isn't good enough, and 95% isn't good enough. You need 100% purity, 100% perfection. So there couldn't be a Hashras Hashchina in Eretz Yisrael unless those places were destroyed. So the Baruch set up a mechanism to identify this is a house, this is a stone which has the Ruach HaTumah, it was used for Avodah Zarah. Now you can destroy it, remove it. And what is the result? The result is you have a Hashras Hashchina in Eretz Yisrael. So it may be a price that this one individual has to pay. Yeah, he's losing his stones, maybe he's losing his house. Right? But this is a benefit for the entire Klal Yisrael. Now there's a possibility of a benefit for the Klal. It may be, when you think about it for a second, that this is also the significance of the fact that Nigei Batim is related to Tzoras Ayin. What do you have Tzoras Ayin? Tzoras Ayin is a certain type of self-centeredness, not interested in the welfare of other people. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, in the 5th parak, that Arba Midas B'nais Neit Tzedakah. There are 4 measures of people that give tzedakah. Haroitza sheyitein v'lo yitnu acherim. If a person wants to give, he doesn't want others to give. Eino ra b'shal acherim. It's an ayin hara. He's very stingy in that he doesn't want to benefit other people. What does it mean? Adrab? He wants them to keep their money. But we know, Chazal tell us, that when you give tzedakah, you're getting more than you're giving. So if I don't want you to give tzedakah, it's not the pshat, I'm so concerned for your welfare, I want you to keep your money. It means I'm so stingy, right? I don't want you to have the benefit that you could have from giving tzedakah. There's eino ra b'shal acherim. If a person wants what others should give and he shouldn't give, eino ra b'shal atzmo. There he's stingy, he wants to keep his money. But the idea is that a person who's a genuinely generous person, a person who wants the welfare of others, he'll give and he'll want that others should give it also. They should also have the benefits of giving stock. And it doesn't only apply to stock, it applies to mitzvahs b'chlal. And if a person really cares about other people, he wants that they should do mitzvahs, they should have a Hashras Hashchina, that they should have an environment of Kedusha. So here you have this amazing situation that you have this fellow, he has a house, this house had a stone, or maybe the house itself has a Ruach HaTumah. It's ma'akev, it prevents the Ashras Hashchina, not just for his house, it prevents the Ashras Hashchina for the entire Eretz Yisrael. This has to be removed. So he's called upon to do what? He's called upon to make a sacrifice for whom? For everybody. Right? When you tear down your house, it's not something you're doing for yourself. Right? You're tearing down your house to facilitate Ashras Hashchina for the entire Klal Yisrael. So now, there are such houses in Eretz Yisrael. Who does the HaKadosh Baruch Hu give those houses to? Right? Nothing is b'mikveh. Right? Why did Reuven get this house, and Shimon got that house, Levi got that house? Why were the houses assigned the way they were? Right? The things we get in life are really to facilitate a tikkun, what we need to rectify in our own lives. So if you're such a person whose primal flaw is tzoras ayin. You're a stingy person, you're a self-centered person, you only care about yourself. So what does the HaKadosh Baruch Hu? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you the opportunity to do something for other people. That's your tikkun. It's a golden opportunity. Finally, you can do something for other people. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives this house that has the stone, or this house that has to be torn down. For what? It has to be torn down in order to create a Ashras HaShechina for the cloud. Who does HaKadosh Baruch Hu give this house to? He assigns it to the one person who doesn't care about anybody else. This is the one person who wouldn't do anything for anybody. And now this is his golden opportunity. Now he gets to do for other people in a big way. Right? He sacrifices his stones, he sacrifices his house, but for what? That there should be Ashras HaShechina for the entire nation. That's the tikkun of Tzoras Ayin. Well, these are the matmoinim. This is the treasure that you get. You tear down your house, but what is the treasure you get? You bring the house l'kedusha, you bring the entire Eretz Yisrael l'kedusha. There's no bigger treasure than that. It's not a question of a chest with coins, says the Sfas Emes. It's mamash the real treasure, which is bringing kedusha into the land. But upon this is the idea of nigei batim. There's a whole new dimension of understanding. It isn't just a question of a punishment for tzoras ayin. It isn't just a question of becoming rich, right? It's a question of HaKadosh Baruch Hu says the Zohar HaKadosh establishing a method by which the tumah can be eradicated from Eretz Yisrael to make Eretz Yisrael a place for the Hashras HaShechina. We have to understand about the Churban Beis HaMikdash something, and a question which is it should be an obvious question. We think of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. It came for certain aveiros. The Gemara Yuma says the Churban Bayis Rishon was Rabbi Eliezer Breitowitz, Shvichas Damim. The Churban Bayis Sheni was Sinas Chinam. So there are aveiros through which we lost the Beis HaMikdash. The simple pshat is that we didn't deserve to have the Beis HaMikdash. Now, you don't deserve to have it, you lose it. But why did it have to be destroyed? If Klal Yisrael was going into Golus, so we also wouldn't have the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is in Eretz Yisrael, we're in Golus. So we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. Just like Eretz Yisrael, right? The Mishnah Pirkei Avos says that Golus Haaretz also comes for the aveiros of Gili Araya, Shvichas Dam, and Avodah Zarah, and also the aveira of Shmitas Haaretz. But the Mishnah says that those three aveiros, the same aveiros that caused the Churban, caused Golus Haaretz. And the Cheshbon Mechara is the same. We don't deserve to have Eretz Yisrael, so we lose Eretz Yisrael. But Eretz Yisrael wasn't destroyed, because we were taken away from Eretz Yisrael. So good, we don't deserve the Beis HaMikdash. So we're taken to the Golus, we're taken from the Beis HaMikdash. Why does the Beis HaMikdash have to be destroyed? Just like Eretz Yisrael wasn't destroyed, we lost it by being taken away from it. So the Beis HaMikdash is the same thing. We don't deserve to have the Beis HaMikdash. Good, we'll not have it because we're taken away from it. Why did it have to be destroyed? The answer is exactly this, because the kayach of the person, through our aveiros, it isn't just we didn't deserve to have the Beis HaMikdash. We defiled the Beis HaMikdash. We were metama the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore we made a situation where the Beis HaMikdash could not just be restored. It had to be rebuilt. It had to be destroyed and built from scratch. That is the power of our aveiros. The Avodah Zarah, the Gilavayas, and the Shvichas Damim isn't just that we didn't deserve to have the Beis HaMikdash. If that's all it was, so we could have been sent into the Golus, and then we have a kapara, we come back to the same old Beis HaMikdash. It says we were metama the Beis HaMikdash, we defiled the Beis HaMikdash. We ruined the Beis HaMikdash. So it's not enough that we're taken away and then we do tshuva and we come back. The Beis HaMikdash has to be built from scratch, has to be restored. That's why the Beis HaMikdash had to be destroyed. It says, where do you see that idea? This idea that we have the kayach to makalkel something to the extent that it requires destruction. That's the parsha of Negei Batim. You see that the Canaanim were able to bring a ruach hatumah onto their houses that necessitated absolute destruction. These couldn't be nichnas into the gvul of kedusha anymore. They had to be destroyed and removed. There couldn't be otherwise ashras hashchin in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore comes the Medrash and says that this entire parsha of Negei Batim is a remez of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, but not stam, it's a remez as an allegory. It is the exact same issue, this exact same issue, that people's actions, it isn't just that it affects themselves. It isn't that I do an Aveira, I don't deserve to have the Beis HaMikdash. It's not just that it affects me. It affects the reality of the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is Mekul to the extent that necessitates Churban. Necessitates Churban, then the building itself has to be destroyed and built from scratch. That's exactly the parsha of Negei Batim. Now there's one other interesting thing in this Medrash that the Chassam Sofer points out, and it's a very puzzling thing. Because in the Torah, in the parsha of the Torah, we have three parties involved. We have the Ribono Shel Olam, we have the owner of the house, and we have the Kohen. So Hashem says, I will place a nega in the house. V'nosati nega tzaras b'eis ha'aretz chuzaskel. That's Hashem's role. Hashem puts the nega. The owner of the house says, Ki nega nirli baboyes. It appears to be a nega. He goes to the Kohen. The Kohen comes and examines the house. But in the mashal to the Beis HaMikdash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu plays two roles. It says that when it says v'nosati nega tzaras, that's a reference to Ribono Shel Olam, of course. It says in the pasuk, Kineni l'chal l'smigdash go'u l'schem, and then it says ubo ashalo abayis zeh HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he tells the Navi Yirmiyah that there's a Avodah Zarah here. So what is the nega? If the nega is the Avodah Zarah, like who put that Avodah Zarah there? It wasn't Ribono Shel Olam himself. So what does it mean? V'nosati nega tzaras b'eis ha'aretz chuzaskel. Hashem says, I put the nega tzaras there. But Hashem put the Avodah Zarah there. It says Klal Yisrael, Menashe put the Avodah Zarah there. So there's no correspondence here at first glance between the psukim and the nimshal. Here HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts the nega, and the owner comes. But if we're talking about the Beis HaMikdash, Hashem himself is the owner. So what, he put the nega there, and then he's coming and telling Yirmiyah, there's a tzaras here, there's a nega here, there's a Avodah Zarah here. What's going on? The Chassam Sofer says a pshat. It says a very, very interesting pshat in a few words. But I'd like to bring it out by reading you a very interesting mimer from Rav Tzadok HaKayin and Sefer Tzidkas HaTzadik. And the idea is so bold that I'll read you the words inside. He's commenting on the Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara in Brachos says, Rabbi Yochanan ilmalei shalosh mikros halalu. If it wasn't for these three psukim, nismaitu ragleim shel Seni Yisrael, the Jews' legs would slip. It would be finished. The Midas Hadin would totally overwhelm us, except for three psukim. What are the three psukim? There are three psukim that say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the power to remove the Yetzer Hara from us. One pasuk says that Ki hine kecheres bihad hayotzer, that your hearts are like pottery in the hands of the potter. That just like the potter can make the clay into whatever he wants, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu could turn our hearts around. It's one pasuk. Another pasuk says, V'hasirosi lev ha'even, I'll remove the heart of stone from you. V'nosati l'chem lev basar, I'll give you a heart of flesh. It's another pasuk. Another pasuk, Hashem says that I will bring back there, it's Yisrael asher harayosi, those people that I did evil to. Meaning those people that I gave the Yetzer Hara to. I'll bring them back and take away the Yetzer Hara. So there are three psukim that say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could take away the Yetzer Hara, which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes responsibility for our Aveiros. Now, we do Aveiros. Why do we do Aveiros? We give in, we succumb to our Yetzer Hara. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, on these three psukim, I take responsibility for giving you a Yetzer Hara. If not for those psukim, we'd be finished. In other words, if we had to take responsibility for what we do because of the Yetzer Hara, we'd be in the big tzaras. But since the Kadosh Baruch Hu takes responsibility, so therefore it's not nismot to Ragleim. Klal Yisrael can still stand on its 2 feet. So this is what he says. Ikarat Tshuva. What is the Ikarat Tshuva? At Shiyoyer Hashem Einov, right? Hashem enlightens his eyes. Sheyus doinus kischuyas. That the Averis return into mitzvahs. Now the Gemara says this. The Gemara says when you do the highest form of Tshuva Mayava, this doinus becomes schuyas. Rotzalaymar, in other words, Sheyakir v'yovim. You should understand, Shekol mashachata, all the Averis you did, Hayagam came to Ratzon Hashem Yisbarach, were also according to Baruch Hu's will. As Chazal say, on the basis of the Shalosh Psukim, that Hashem gave us the Yetzer Hara. So you see, it's according to Baruch Hu's will. Now, what does this mean? That Tshuva Me'ava is Doinas Nasu L'Schuyas, because it comes out this was according to Baruch Hu's will. It means like this. Let's say you have a decision to make. 2 ways to go, X or Y. And you choose X. If ultimately the consequences of X are good, then you would say, oh, it was a good thing I chose X. What if ultimately the consequences of X are bad? Then it wasn't a good thing you chose X. Would have been better to have chosen Y. Now, a person has a question, should I do the Aveira or not do the Aveira? So, 99% of the time, the consequences of Aveiras aren't good. HaKadosh Baruch Hu foresees that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu foresees you're going to do this Aveira, the consequences are not going to be good. And therefore, if you'd ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu at this moment, would you want the person to do the Aveira? HaKadosh Baruch Hu would answer no. I don't want it. Because I foresee the consequences are going to be bad. But what if the consequences of this Aveira are good? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu foresees that you're going to do a Tshuva Me'ava, which will bring you closer to the Rebbeinu Shalom than you ever would have been. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will say that it was a good thing you did the Aveira. Now again, as a rule, if you'd ask a human being, is it good to do the Aveira? Since the human being has no knowledge of the future, he has to go with the percentages. So if 99% of the time the consequences of an Aveira are bad, only 1% of the time the consequences are good, then going with the law of averages, don't do the Aveira. The likelihood is the consequences will be bad. But a HaKadosh Baruch Hu who has Yediyah, who has foreknowledge of the future, it'll depend. HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what the consequences will be. So if the consequences are going to be good, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is happy that you did it. In which case, explains to Tzadok, that's the real tshuva. The real tshuva is you turn the Aveira into the mitzvah, because when you turn the consequences of the Aveira into something good, then it comes out that it really was something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was pleased with. That's the pella of Zdoinus Nasul L'Schuyas. It becomes a merit because it becomes something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was actually svarotzoin from, that he's satisfied from. It's a very hard thing to digest. You have to think about that for a minute. The Chassam Sofer says the same thing on this parsha. That the ultimate tikkun, which will happen in the time of the Binyan Bayis Shlishi, is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts responsibility for all the Aveiros that led to the Churban. That all the Aveiros that led to the Churban and led to the Tshuva that followed from the Churban and led to the Binyan Bayis Shlishi and all the Giluyim of the Binyan Bayis Shlishi, when all of those happen, then it will come out that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that my having given them the Yetzer Hara in the first place to commit those Aveiros was a good thing. And that's v'nasati nega tzaras v'esaretz chuzasam, the Chassam Sofer says. That I accept responsibility for having placed the Avodah Zarah in the Beis HaMikdash, the Tzelem Shel Menashe. which is an amazing, amazing thing. Though at the time that it happened, we would have said it's a terrible thing, it's a Vaydazar. But to the extent that as history unfolds and the tshuva is realized, that all the kilkulim, everything that happened bad in history, ultimately has its tikkun, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepts responsibility, and he brings the Gemara in Brachas, Asher Harayosi, and he says, that's v'nasati neged tzaras, v'yitzaretz l'chuzaschem. Okay, this is an amazing thing. Whether we understand it or not, requires a little, to digest that. But getting back to the main subject, this is the theme of Nigei Batim. The theme of Nigei Batim is the kayak of the person to be makalkel or to be misaking his environment. That's what the Zohar says. If a person builds a house with the proper kavanah, then it becomes a place which facilitates avodas Hashem. Upakarato novecha v'lo sechta. On the other hand, if a person is makalkel like the Canaanim were, he turns the place into a place which doesn't have the potential for Ashruas Hashchina. And that is exactly what the parasha is telling us, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu invented the whole idea of Nigei Batim in order that the Ruach HaTumah that the Canaanim placed, we should be able to remove. But we as well have to be cautious about this. It's not just the Ruach HaTumah that the Canaanim produce. There's the Ruach HaTumah that we produce. We have to be very careful about. Because we have to understand that if we want our homes to be places of purity, places of Kedusha, places of Ashras Hashchina, we have to be very careful in what we do and what we say, and our kavanas, and that we invest in the building of our houses, and the activities in the houses, that we can make them places that are right for Ashras Hashchina, and Chas v'Shalom, we could be makalkal. And that perhaps is a very, very important lesson which transcends the pratim of the Parsha of Nigei Batim. It seems we don't have Nigei Batim as manazeh. Right? But whether our houses are places of Ashras Hashchina or Chas v'Shalom, there are places which prevent Ashras Hashchina, that is very much in our hands, even as manazeh.